She walked into the gala with nothing but her swollen belly and shattered pride. They laughed, they mocked, until a phone buzzed. A stranger's message. A waiting jet. Who was watching her fall, and why did they want to save her? Tonight, the mystery began. Emma Weston, 6 months pregnant and already abandoned, stood at the edge of the glittering crowd, clutching her worn clutch like it was armor. Her dress, a borrowed silk gown 2 sizes too small, clung to her body and revealed the unmistakable curve of her pregnancy. The whispers surrounded her like knives, sharp, merciless, slicing into her dignity with every passing second. "That's Andrew's wife, isn't it?" one woman murmured behind a jeweled fan. "Ex-wife soon enough," another replied with a smirk. "Poor thing, pregnant and broke. He cut her off weeks ago. She should have stayed in Pennsylvania. Look at her, she doesn't belong here anymore." Emma's cheeks burned. Her heart hammered so loudly she was sure the entire ballroom could hear it. She tried to focus on breathing, on steadying herself, but the humiliation was suffocating. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to wake up from this nightmare. And then, across the room, she saw him. Andrew Weston, her husband, the man she had trusted with her life, her dreams, her child's future. Tonight, he looked like a golden god. His tuxedo was tailored to perfection, his dark hair slicked back, his glass of champagne raised like a trophy. And by his side was a woman half his age, a social media starlet with legs for days, lips that never stopped pouting, and a laugh loud enough to echo over the orchestra's violins. Andrew bent close to her, his hand sliding possessively around her waist. Cameras flashed, investors laughed at his jokes, and Emma felt like the air had been punched out of her lungs. That used to be her place. That used to be her life. She tried to turn away, but the sound of his voice carried across the marble hall like poison. "She'll beg to come back," Andrew boasted, his grin smug, his eyes scanning the crowd as if daring someone to disagree. "Mark my words, women like her? They can't survive on their own. She's just a housewife with a belly and no prospects. She'll crawl back before the baby's born." The men around him laughed, raising their glasses in agreement. His mistress leaned closer, running her hand through his hair. The cruelty of it hit Emma like a thunderbolt. She felt the walls closing in, the whispers growing louder, the pitying eyes cutting deeper. For a moment, she thought she might faint. The humiliation was unbearable. She wanted to scream, to throw her drink in his face, to tell the world who Andrew Weston really was. But her voice lodged in her throat, trapped by fear and despair. She stumbled toward the exit, her heels clicking desperately against the marble. She needed to get out, away from the laughter, away from him, away from the eyes that saw her as nothing but a discarded wife. She pushed past waiters carrying silver trays, past women dripping in jewels, past photographers who didn't even bother to lift their cameras anymore. Her heart ached with every step. She thought of her baby, her only reason to keep moving. "I'll protect you," she whispered under her breath, her hand tightening over her belly. "No matter what, I'll protect you." And then it happened. Her clutch buzzed. Confused, she stopped near the coat check, fumbling for her phone. A message had appeared from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, thinking it was a mistake, but something made her open it. "Miss Weston, your jet is ready. Please proceed to the private terminal. Everything you need is waiting." Her eyes widened. Her heart froze. What jet? She hadn't told anyone she was at the gala. She hadn't arranged for anything. Was it a cruel prank? Another attempt to humiliate her? She looked around, panic flooding her chest. Andrew was across the room, still laughing with his mistress, oblivious to her. None of the guests seemed to notice her. No one was paying attention. Her phone buzzed again. "Please do not delay. The pilot has been instructed to wait. Security will escort you if necessary." Emma's hand trembled. This couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake. A jet? For her? For the pregnant woman everyone whispered was worthless, broke, and abandoned? Tears stung her eyes. She wanted to believe it, but she couldn't. People didn't just send private jets for women like her. Not unless someone powerful, someone untouchable had decided to intervene. Her mind raced. Could it be her father's old business partner? An investor who pitied her? Or, her breath caught, was it someone who knew exactly what Andrew had done and wanted revenge? She pressed her hand against her chest, trying to steady her heartbeat. A choice loomed before her. She could walk out of this ballroom, back to her tiny apartment, back to the fear and uncertainty that had become her reality. Or she could take a leap into the unknown, accept the mysterious invitation, and step into a world she thought she had lost forever. She stared down at her phone, the message glowing like a lifeline in the darkness. Her lips trembled as she whispered to herself, "Who sent this jet? And why for me?" Because the answer, when it came, would change everything. Emma Weston had once believed her life was a fairy tale. She wasn't born into money, wasn't groomed for high society, wasn't one of those women who walked red carpets draped in couture. She was just a girl from a small Pennsylvania town where Friday night football was the week's main event, and the local diner was where everyone went for gossip and pie. Her father worked long shifts at the steel mill, his hands calloused, his shoulders stooped with years of labor. Her mother was a nurse who stitched up half the town's injuries with the same gentle touch she used to braid Emma's hair at night. Life was simple, sometimes hard, but never without love. Emma grew up knowing the value of sacrifice, of dignity, of resilience. She worked part-time at the grocery store through high school, saved every penny she could, and managed to get into a small state college on scholarships. She dreamed of becoming a teacher, of giving children the chance at opportunity that she herself had fought so hard for. And then came Andrew. He swept into her life like a storm she never saw coming. He was in town for a corporate conference, looking every bit the golden boy Wall Street adored. His smile was dazzling, his attention intoxicating. For a small-town girl who had never been noticed beyond the county lines, Andrew Weston seemed like a miracle. He said she was different, that she wasn't like the shallow women of New York who only wanted his money. He promised her the world, and at 22, Emma believed him. Within a year, she was living in a Manhattan penthouse. She traded her jeans for designer dresses, her small-town routine for charity galas and society luncheons. Andrew loved showing her off at first. "My sweet Emma," he'd call her, brushing his hand across her cheek in front of investors and board members. But soon, the sparkle faded. The man who once brought her wildflowers from the roadside stopped coming home at all. The laughter that once made her feel cherished turned sharp, laced with criticism. He mocked her small-town ways, sneered at her attempts to fit into high society. "You'll never really belong here, Emma," he once spat during an argument. "You should be grateful I even married you." Still, she stayed. She told herself love was work, that marriage meant sacrifice. She believed in vows, in building a family. When she found out she was pregnant, she thought it might heal the rift between them. She imagined Andrew holding their child, imagined the joy that would return to his eyes. For one fragile moment, she believed he might remember the man he used to be. But she was wrong. Pregnancy became another weapon he used against her. He complained about the medical bills, mocked her swollen ankles, rolled his eyes when she turned down wine at dinners. "You're ruining your figure," he muttered once when he thought she couldn't hear. The man who had once vowed to protect her now saw her as a burden. The final blow came when she discovered his mistress, a young influencer barely old enough to rent a car, parading around in designer gowns bought with Andrew's money. He didn't even bother hiding it. He flaunted the affair in front of friends, whispered cruel comments about Emma within earshot, and when she confronted him, he laughed. "You'll never leave me," he told her. "Where would you go? Who would take you in? You're just a pregnant housewife. You'll come crawling back." Emma wanted to scream, to throw his words back at him, but instead she swallowed the pain. She packed her things quietly, moving into a tiny apartment she could barely afford. She worked part-time at a bookstore between doctor's appointments, scraping by on savings and the kindness of friends. Nights were the hardest, lying awake with her hand over her belly, whispering promises to the child inside her. "You won't grow up in a house like that," she vowed. "You won't hear the kind of cruelty I did. I'll give you love, even if I have nothing else." But deep down, fear gnawed at her. She was alone. The money Andrew cut off had left her vulnerable. The whispers from his circle painted her as pathetic, dependent, weak. Each day she fought to keep her dignity, but each night the weight of despair threatened to crush her. Still, Emma carried herself with quiet strength. She showed up at the bookstore with a smile, helped elderly customers find novels, read stories to children in the corner during her breaks. People often wondered how she managed to stay so kind, so patient, when the world had been so cruel. The truth was, Emma had learned something her husband never understood. True strength wasn't in money or power. It was in the ability to endure, to keep standing when life tried to break you. And yet, on nights like the gala, when the chandeliers gleamed and laughter echoed off marble walls, Emma felt the crushing weight of isolation. Surrounded by the wealth and privilege that had once been hers, she couldn't ignore the truth. She was an outcast now. A woman discarded by a man who thought she was worthless. Her only solace was the life growing inside her. She rubbed her belly gently, whispering to her unborn child, "You are my reason. You are my hope." But as she clutched that phone at the gala, staring at the message about a private jet waiting for her, something shifted. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of something she thought she had lost. Possibility. Who had sent it? Why? Could it mean a chance at safety, at dignity, at a new beginning? Emma's pulse raced. She had no idea that the person behind that message was about to pull her out of the shadows and into a world more powerful and more dangerous than anything she'd ever known. Because someone had decided Emma Weston was far from weak. Someone had decided she was worth saving. The gala at the Waldorf Grand Hotel was meant to be the crowning jewel of New York's social calendar. The invitation alone was embossed in gold, delivered by hand, and guarded like a treasure. Every year, the city's richest paraded through its towering marble doors, dressed in gowns worth small fortunes and suits stitched by European hands. For the elite, it wasn't just a party. It was a stage, a marketplace of power, where deals worth billions were whispered between sips of champagne. The ballroom itself seemed designed to remind the rest of the world of its insignificance. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, scattering light across polished marble floors, so spotless they reflected the glittering shoes that walked over them. Tables were draped in silk cloths embroidered with golden thread, each centerpiece a riot of roses and lilies imported from Paris that very morning. Waiters in white gloves carried trays of beluga caviar and Dom Perignon, gliding through the room with the silence of shadows. The orchestra played from a balcony above, the strings swelling in harmony with the clinking of glasses. Laughter bubbled through the air, smooth and practiced, the kind of laughter that never quite reached the eyes. Conversations drifted, mergers, stocks, art auctions, philanthropy, all coated in the same gloss of superiority. To those who belonged, this world was intoxicating. To those who didn't, it was suffocating. Emma Weston had once stood proudly at Andrew's side in this very room. She remembered how he had introduced her to board members, his arm wrapped around her waist, whispering in her ear that she was the most beautiful woman there. She had believed him. She had smiled for the cameras, shaken hands with senators and CEOs, danced under the chandeliers as if she belonged. But tonight, Emma wasn't a wife, wasn't a hostess, wasn't a woman admired. She was an outcast. A pregnant woman with a borrowed dress, standing alone near the edge of the room, clutching a glass of water while others toasted with vintage champagne. Every detail of the gala pressed against her like a cruel reminder. The glimmer of diamonds made her think of the necklace Andrew had once bought her, a necklace she had pawned to pay rent last month. The laughter of women in couture gowns reminded her of the dress fittings she used to attend, where stylists fussed over every seam. The confident swagger of men in tuxedos made her think of Andrew, who once told her, "This is our world now." But it wasn't hers anymore. As she scanned the crowd, Emma noticed the subtle glances in her direction. Women leaned closer to whisper, their lips painted in shades of arrogance. Men smirked, their eyes sliding over her belly before dismissing her entirely. She heard the fragments of gossip float through the air like poison. "She looks exhausted. I heard he cut her off completely. She won't last on her own." Emma turned her face away, pretending to admire the gilded columns along the wall. But the humiliation burned hot in her chest. Each whisper was a knife, twisting deeper into wounds that had barely begun to heal. The contrast between her life and the gala was unbearable. Just hours earlier, she had been sitting in her tiny apartment, its peeling paint and flickering light bulbs mocking the life she used to have. Dinner had been a bowl of instant noodles, eaten with her feet tucked under a blanket to save on heating. She had walked to the subway because she couldn't afford a cab. And now, here she stood, surrounded by chandeliers worth more than her entire year's rent. She felt like an intruder, a ghost, haunting a world that had already forgotten her. The irony wasn't lost on her. The gala's official purpose was charity, raising money for children's hospitals and educational programs. Yet the very people donating millions thought nothing of mocking a pregnant woman who had lost everything. Emma knew their kind. She had dined with them, smiled politely at their jokes, watched them spend more on a bottle of wine than her father had earned in a year. They gave to charity, not out of kindness but for prestige. To them, generosity was another accessory. Emma's eyes landed on the grand staircase at the center of the room, its red carpet glowing under the chandeliers. Years ago, she had descended those steps with Andrew, her hand in his, cameras flashing like fireworks. She had felt untouchable then. But tonight, the staircase looked like a wall she could never climb again. Her breath grew shallow as she caught sight of Andrew himself. He stood near the stage, surrounded by investors and politicians, his mistress pressed against his side like a prized possession. He laughed, gesturing grandly with his champagne glass, as if he owned the room. And in many ways, he did. Emma's stomach tightened. She wanted to run, to escape the suffocating air, but her legs refused to move. She was trapped between the ghosts of her past and the bleakness of her present. The orchestra swelled, the conductor raising his baton, and the crowd turned toward the stage where Andrew was about to speak. Emma's pulse quickened. She knew his speeches. Smooth, confident, dripping with charm. She braced herself for the performance, for the lies he would spin about family, legacy, and responsibility. But before he could speak, her phone buzzed again. She slipped it from her clutch, her hands trembling. Another message. Private terminal secured. Car is waiting outside. Leave now. Emma's throat tightened. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought someone might hear it. She glanced around, terrified someone was watching her, but no one paid her any mind. To them, she was invisible. And yet, someone out there saw her. Someone powerful enough to arrange a car, a jet, a way out of this nightmare. The chandeliers gleamed above her. The laughter swirled around her, but Emma could only focus on the glowing screen in her hand. She had to decide, would she stay in the world that had broken her, or step into the unknown that waited beyond those marble doors? Andrew Weston had always known how to command a room. Even before the tuxedos and the wealth, even before the magazine covers that named him one of the top 40 under 40, he had carried himself with the same smug certainty that the world owed him, that people existed to orbit around him. It was part charm, part arrogance, and part ruthless hunger for power. Emma used to admire it. When she was 22 and dazzled by his ambition, she mistook that arrogance for confidence. She thought his certainty meant security. But tonight, as she watched him standing under the chandeliers, his mistress clinging to his arm like a glittering accessory, Emma realized what it really was. Andrew Weston wasn't confident, he was cruel. The mistress, Ela Monroe, was everything Andrew wanted the world to see. Young, radiant, shallow enough not to threaten him, ambitious enough to make herself useful. She was 23, an Instagram-famous entrepreneur whose career consisted mostly of posting photos of herself in designer clothes other men had bought her. Her beauty was undeniable. Long legs, endless hair, a smile trained to look both innocent and knowing at the same time. But beneath the surface, there was nothing. Andrew didn't care. She was the perfect distraction. She made him feel powerful, validated, wanted. With Emma, he had been forced to share his life, his home, his vulnerabilities. With Ela, he shared nothing but champagne and hotel suites. "Smile for the cameras, darling," Andrew whispered, his lips brushing against Ela's ear as the flashbulbs went off. She giggled, pressing closer, her hand sliding down the front of his tuxedo as though staking a public claim. They were standing in the exact center of the gala, where everyone could see them. Andrew wanted it that way. He didn't just flaunt his affair. He weaponized it. He wanted Emma to see. He wanted the investors to see. He wanted the whole city to understand that he had traded up, that he could discard a wife 6 months pregnant and replace her with something shinier without consequence. And the crowd encouraged it. They laughed at his jokes, shook his hand, congratulated him on moving on. These were men who did the same in their own homes, who saw women as replaceable the way they saw last season's stock options. In their world, infidelity wasn't a scandal, it was a sport. Andrew called a voice from near the stage, "Say a few words." He grinned, lifting his champagne glass, the light catching the diamond cufflinks Emma had once given him as a wedding gift. He climbed the small steps to the microphone, Hila following gracefully, her gown shimmering under the chandeliers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Andrew began, his voice smooth, practiced. "It's an honor to host you tonight. This gala is not only a celebration of our successes, but a reminder of our responsibilities. We are here to give back, to build a future for the next generation." The hypocrisy nearly choked Emma. Here he was, speaking of responsibility while he abandoned his pregnant wife. Here he was, speaking of the future, while mocking the child that hadn't even been born yet. Andrew continued, his words rolling easily. "This year, Weston Capital has expanded further than ever before. Our partnerships have reached global markets, and together with many of you in this room, we are shaping industries. Tonight, let us toast to progress, to prosperity, and to a brighter tomorrow." The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Hila kissed his cheek, posing perfectly for the photographers. But Andrew wasn't finished. He leaned closer to the microphone, lowering his voice just enough to sound intimate, just enough to make every word sting. "And let us also toast to moving forward, to leaving the past behind us where it belongs." The crowd chuckled knowingly. Andrew's smirk deepened. He raised his glass higher. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes sweeping across the room until they landed squarely on Emma. The moment stretched like glass about to shatter. Emma's chest tightened, her face burning. He wanted her humiliated. He wanted the world to see her as nothing more than discarded baggage. And judging by the approving laughter rippling through the crowd, his plan was working. Hila tightened her grip on his arm, whispering something into his ear that made him laugh again. Emma couldn't hear the words, but she could guess. They were probably laughing about her, about the swollen belly she carried, about how pathetic she must look standing alone at the edge of the room. For years, Emma had endured his cruelty in private. Tonight, he had made it public. And yet, there was something he didn't know. Something that would strike him harder than any humiliation he could ever inflict. Because while Andrew Weston raised his glass to toast his mistress, a private jet sat waiting on the tarmac under someone else's name. Someone far more powerful than Andrew could ever dream to be. And that jet wasn't waiting for Andrew. It was waiting for Emma. The applause for Andrew's toast had barely faded when the night took its cruelest turn. Emma thought she could slip away quietly, escape the suffocating room before anyone noticed her trembling hands and tear-filled eyes. But Andrew had no intention of letting her leave with dignity. "Wait," his voice rang out smoothly, amplified by the microphone. "I almost forgot, there's one more thing to celebrate tonight." The crowd hushed, all eyes turning toward him. Emma froze in place, her stomach tightening. She knew that tone. It was the same mocking, cutting tone he had used in their home when no one was watching. Andrew gestured toward her with his champagne glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to acknowledge a very special guest, my wife." He dragged the word out, smirking. Or should I say, soon-to-be ex-wife. The crowd gasped, heads turned. Emma felt every eye in the ballroom pierce through her. She wanted to disappear, but her legs refused to move. "There she is," Andrew continued, pointing as if she were some curiosity on display. Emma Weston, the loyal little housewife, still trying to play dress-up with the big kids. Laughter rippled through the audience. Some of the women covered their mouths, pretending to be shocked, but their eyes glittered with cruel amusement. The men smirked, nudging each other like schoolboys sharing a joke. Emma's throat burned. She tightened her grip on her clutch, forcing herself to stand tall, but her heart was splintering inside her chest. Andrew wasn't finished. He never was. "She's 6 months along, carrying my child," he said, his voice loud enough for every corner of the ballroom. "But she still thinks she can waltz in here, dressed in borrowed silk, pretending she belongs in this world. Poor thing doesn't realize, it takes more than a wedding ring to stay in this league." Hila leaned into the microphone with a giggle. "Don't be too hard on her, darling," she purred. "At least she tried." I mean. Her eyes swept over Emma's too tight dress, the swollen ankles hidden in cheap heels. Effort counts for something, right? The crowd erupted with laughter this time, sharper, crueler. Emma's cheeks flamed, her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Every whisper, every mocking glance pressed down on her like a weight she could not bear. She thought of her parents back in Pennsylvania, the values they had raised her with. Dignity, kindness, pride. What would they think if they saw her now? Humiliated in front of hundreds, treated like nothing more than a punchline by the man she had once loved. Andrew raised his glass again. "To Emma," he declared. Proof that sometimes mistakes are best left behind. The room clinked in unison, crystal glasses chiming like funeral bells. Emma's chest constricted. She could barely breathe. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but her voice was lost in the roar of ridicule. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the hem of her dress. A waiter reached out to steady her, his eyes filled with pity. That was worse than the laughter. She couldn't stand pity. She pushed past him, her heels clicking desperately across the marble floor, heading for the doors. But Andrew's voice followed her like a whip. "Run along, Emma," he called after her, the microphone amplifying every syllable. "You'll be begging to come back soon enough. You can't survive without me. Everyone here knows it." The doors loomed ahead, her only salvation. Emma shoved them open, bursting into the hallway. Her breath ragged, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. The laughter from inside echoed after her, chasing her down the corridor like a cruel chorus. She collapsed against the wall, her hand cradling her belly. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her unborn child. "I'm so sorry you had to hear that." Her phone buzzed again. She fumbled it out of her clutch, her hands shaking. The message glowed against the screen. "Car is waiting outside. Time to go." Emma wiped her tears, staring at the words through blurred vision. Someone out there knew. Someone out there was watching. For the first time that night, a flicker of hope pierced through the darkness. But she couldn't shake the question twisting in her chest. Who had sent the jet? And what would they want in return? The hallway outside the ballroom was quiet compared to the storm she had just fled. But the silence wasn't comforting. It was suffocating. Emma leaned against the wall, her chest heaving, her makeup streaking down her face as hot tears fell. The muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses still seeped through the double doors behind her, each one a reminder of the humiliation she had just endured. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the polished marble floor, her silk dress pooling around her swollen ankles. For a moment, she couldn't move. She felt like a shattered doll, broken, discarded, left behind. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, clutching it protectively. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't deserve this. You don't deserve any of it." The tiny flutter she felt in her stomach nearly broke her heart. It was as if the baby were answering her, reminding her that despite everything, life still beat within her. But instead of comfort, it only deepened her pain, because how could she give this child the life it deserved when she had nothing left? She thought of the rent due in 2 weeks, of the bills piling on her kitchen counter, of the empty refrigerator she had stared into that very morning. She thought of her parents' disappointed faces, how ashamed she would be if they saw her like this, pregnant, abandoned, and humiliated in front of the very people who once applauded her. Her phone buzzed again, vibrating in her trembling hands. She stared at the screen. "Leave now. Your car is waiting outside the east entrance." She dropped the phone onto her lap, sobbing. She didn't understand. Who was sending these messages? Why would anyone care? People in Andrew's world didn't help women like her. They mocked them. They discarded them. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to block out the images replaying in her mind. Andrew's smirk, Ila's mocking tone, the laughter that had rolled like thunder through the ballroom. Her body shook with silent cries, the kind that tore through her chest and left her gasping for air. Memories flooded back. The night Andrew had first told her she wasn't enough. The time he had thrown her birthday gift into the trash because it wasn't appropriate for his image. The way he had rolled his eyes when she decorated the nursery, muttering that it was too sentimental. Every cruelty stacked on top of the last until she could hardly recognize the man she had once loved. And tonight, he had destroyed the last shred of dignity she had left. Emma buried her face in her hands. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear from the world forever. She thought of taking the subway back to her tiny apartment, pulling the curtains shut, and never leaving again. She thought of giving up on Andrew, on society, on herself. But then she felt it again. The baby moved inside her. A tiny kick, faint but certain. Emma's breath caught. She lowered her hands, staring at her belly through blurred tears. The baby wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. "I can't break," she whispered hoarsely. "Not for you." Still, fear consumed her. The car waiting outside, what if it was a trap? What if Andrew had arranged it just to mock her further? What if she left the hotel only to find herself even more humiliated? Her body shook with indecision. She wanted to believe in hope, but hope had betrayed her too many times before. The doors to the ballroom suddenly opened, and Emma scrambled to her feet, wiping her tears. A group of elegantly dressed women swept past her, their perfume trailing behind them. They barely looked at her, except for one who sneered, pitiful. Emma's face burned with shame. She couldn't go back inside. She couldn't face them again. She had no choice but to move forward, even if forward meant stepping into the unknown. Her phone buzzed once more. "Miss Weston, we assure you, you are safe. Trust us. Leave now." She stared at the message, her pulse racing. Whoever it was, they knew her name. They knew her situation. And they sounded certain, almost protective. Emma wiped her face with the back of her hand, took a deep breath and whispered, "Please, God, let this be real." She picked up her clutch, steadied herself, and began walking toward the east entrance. Each step felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. Her heels clicked against the marble, echoing in the empty hallway, as though the hotel itself were holding its breath. The doors at the end of the corridor came into view. Beyond them lay the night, the city, and maybe, just maybe, a chance at salvation. Emma's trembling hand reached for the handle, and in that moment, she had no idea that the life she thought was over was about to be rewritten forever. The cold night air hit Emma like a slap the moment she pushed open the east doors of the Waldorf Grand. The city was alive outside, honking cabs, neon signs flickering, people rushing along the sidewalks with their coats pulled tight. But waiting at the curb was something that did not belong to the chaos of New York streets. A sleek black Mercedes with tinted windows idled under the hotel's grand awning. Its polished frame gleamed under the street lamps, and beside it stood a driver in a tailored suit, holding the door open as if he had been expecting her. "Miss Weston," the driver said smoothly, inclining his head. "We've been waiting for you." Emma froze on the marble steps, her breath clouding in the winter air. "Who are you?" she whispered. The driver smiled faintly. "Someone who believes you deserve better. Please, allow me to take you to the terminal. The jet is ready." Her heart pounded. This couldn't be real. Andrew must have set this up to humiliate her further. But something in the driver's calm, steady gaze told her otherwise. He wasn't mocking her. He wasn't sneering. He was respectful, almost protective. Emma clutched her belly and shook her head. "I don't understand. I don't know anyone who would." Her voice faltered. "I can't get on some plane without knowing who's behind this." The driver's expression softened. "You will understand soon enough. But you must trust me. The man who arranged this, he has more power than your husband could ever dream of, and he sent me for you and your child." Emma's knees nearly buckled. Someone knew. Someone cared. But who? Still trembling, she allowed the driver to guide her into the warm leather interior of the car. The city blurred past the tinted windows as they drove, Emma's mind spinning with questions. Her phone buzzed again, another message appearing. "Don't be afraid. You are safe now. I'll explain everything once you're aboard." Her throat tightened as she read it. The words weren't cold or transactional. They carried weight, warmth, like a promise. The drive to the private terminal seemed both endless and instantaneous. When the car finally slowed, Emma's breath caught in her chest. Beyond the security gates, lit by floodlights, stood a gleaming Gulfstream G700, its white fuselage shining like a beacon in the night. The steps had already been lowered. The cabin lights glowed invitingly. Emma stared out the window in disbelief. She had seen planes like that in Andrew's magazines, had overheard him brag about billionaires who owned them, but never in her life had she imagined stepping aboard one herself. The driver opened her door and extended his hand. "This way, Miss Weston." Her heels clicked against the tarmac as she walked toward the jet, her pulse racing faster with every step. She wanted to turn back, to demand answers, but something inside her urged her forward. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was hope. At the top of the steps, a flight attendant greeted her with a gentle smile. "Welcome, Miss Weston. Please come inside. You must be exhausted." Emma hesitated at the doorway, her eyes sweeping over the cabin. Cream leather seats, polished wood paneling, soft lighting that glowed like warmth itself. It felt like another world, far removed from the cold marble of the gala. She sank into one of the plush seats, clutching her belly, still unsure if this was a dream. The flight attendant knelt beside her, offering a glass of water. "You don't need to be afraid," she said softly. "You're safe here." Emma's voice cracked. Safe from what? Before the attendant could answer, her phone buzzed again. A new message. "Emma, I'm sorry it took me this long, but I couldn't stand by any longer. Andrew doesn't deserve you. You and your child deserve protection, and that's what you'll have from me." Her hands shook as she read it. She didn't recognize the number, but the certainty in the words made her chest tighten. Whoever this was, they knew Andrew. They knew her. And they weren't offering pity. They were offering rescue. She typed a trembling reply. "Who are you?" The answer came within seconds. "Someone Andrew once tried to destroy. But unlike him, I don't abandon people. I build them back up, and I intend to see you rise again." Emma's breath caught. A billionaire. It had to be. Only someone with unimaginable resources could send a jet on a whim, arrange a driver, promise protection. But why her? Why now? The engines hummed to life, vibrating through the cabin as the pilot prepared for takeoff. Emma's heart raced. She had a choice: to stay seated, to trust this unseen savior, or to demand to be let off before the wheels left the ground. Her phone buzzed one last time. "Emma, this isn't just about saving you. It's about giving your child the future Andrew swore he'd never allow. Trust me, everything is about to change." Emma's lips trembled. She pressed a hand over her belly, whispering to the baby inside her. Maybe this is our chance." The jet began to roll toward the runway, the lights of New York shrinking in the distance. Emma closed her eyes, bracing herself, knowing that whatever awaited her on the other side of this flight would be nothing like the life she had known before. And she had no idea that the man waiting at the other end of the runway was the one person Andrew Weston feared most. When the jet touched down hours later, Emma expected confusion, maybe even fear. But instead, what she felt was awe. Outside the window stretched the sprawling estate of a man whose name carried whispers in every financial circle, but whose face was rarely seen. The door opened, and waiting at the bottom of the steps was Victor Harrington. Billionaire investor, media mogul, the one man Andrew Weston had never been able to outmaneuver. His empire stretched across industries, but what people spoke of most was his uncanny ability to turn everything he touched into gold. He wasn't like Andrew. Where Andrew's smile was smug, Victor's presence was calm, commanding, without effort. He was older, early 40s, with silver streaks at his temples and eyes sharp enough to cut through steel. When Emma descended the stairs, he didn't smirk, didn't gawk. He extended his hand with a dignity she hadn't felt in years. "Emma," he said simply, his voice steady. "You're safe now." For the first time in months, she believed it. Victor Harrington wasn't just rescuing her. He was offering her something she hadn't dared to dream of: restoration. Over the weeks that followed, Emma found herself surrounded not by pity, but by opportunity. The estate became her sanctuary, a sprawling mansion nestled by the ocean, its halls filled with light instead of shadows. For the first time in months, Emma could sleep without fear. Doctors checked on her regularly, assuring her the baby was healthy. Nutritionists crafted meals for her, attendants ensured she had everything she needed. But Victor gave her something far more valuable than comfort. He gave her purpose. "You are not weak," he told her one morning, as they sat on the veranda overlooking the crashing waves. "Andrew convinced you of that because it served him. But I see the woman who stood by him when he was nothing, the woman strong enough to walk away when he became cruel. That woman is not gone. She just needs to rise again." Emma's throat tightened. "I don't even recognize myself anymore," she admitted. "Then let's rebuild," Victor replied. "Not just for you, but for your child. The best revenge you can give Andrew is not anger. It's thriving. And so it began. Emma trained her mind as much as her appearance. Tutors came to teach her finance, public speaking, business etiquette. She read late into the night, filling notebooks with knowledge Andrew had once mocked her for even wanting. Victor didn't treat her like a victim. He treated her like a partner being prepared for battle. Her transformation was gradual but undeniable. The day she first stood before the mirror in a tailored suit, a deep navy that hugged her curves but radiated authority, she hardly recognized herself. The timid girl who once clung to Andrew's shadow was gone. Now she carried herself differently, her shoulders back, her eyes steady, her voice no longer trembling. Victor arranged for her to work with stylists, not to hide her pregnancy but to embrace it. Flowing gowns and jewel tones, hair styled elegantly, jewelry chosen with precision. When Emma walked into a room now, heads turned not in mockery but in respect. She wasn't the discarded wife. She was the woman reborn. But it wasn't just appearance. Emma's mindset shifted too. She no longer asked herself, "What will they think?" She asked, "What do I deserve?" She no longer whispered apologies to her unborn child. She told her baby stories of strength, of resilience, of futures that could not be stolen. Every night, standing by the ocean, Emma pressed her hands over her belly and whispered, "We are not victims anymore. We are fighters." And slowly, the fear that had once consumed her gave way to something far more powerful: determination. Victor noticed it. One evening as they reviewed documents in his study, he leaned back in his chair and studied her. "You're ready," he said. Emma looked up, startled. "Ready for what?" His lips curved into the faintest smile. "For the world to see you again. Not as Andrew's discarded wife, not as a victim, but as the woman who will stand on her own and make him regret ever underestimating you." Emma's heart raced. She wasn't sure she believed she could face Andrew again. But a part of her longed for it, longed to walk into a room and no longer feel small, but to stand eye to eye with the man who had once crushed her spirit. Victor must have seen the flicker in her eyes, because he slid a file across the desk toward her. "There's a gala next week. The same crowd that mocked you will be there. Andrew will be there, with her, and so will you." Emma's hands trembled as she opened the file. Inside was everything: her tailored gown, her security detail, even the press coverage all already arranged. Victor wasn't just preparing her. He was orchestrating her return. She stared at him, her breath caught. "What if I'm not strong enough?" Victor leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "You are, because strength isn't about never falling. It's about rising when no one expects you to. And Emma, you're about to rise higher than he ever imagined." Emma closed the file slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She thought of Andrew's mocking voice, of Ila's cruel laughter, of the whispers that had followed her out of the ballroom. And for the first time, she smiled. Not a smile of naivety or hope, but of quiet, burning resolve. She stood, smoothing the fabric of her gown. "Then let him see me," she said softly. Victor's eyes glinted with approval. "Oh, he will." Because at the next gala, the woman Andrew had humiliated would return, not broken, not begging, but untouchable. The night of the gala arrived like a storm she had been preparing for all her life. The Waldorf Grand glowed again. Chandeliers lit, red carpets rolled out, photographers flashing as the city's elite paraded inside. It was the same ballroom that had nearly broken Emma weeks before. But tonight, she wasn't the same woman who had fled in tears. The limousine door opened, and the crowd outside gasped. Emma stepped out. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk, cut elegantly to flatter her pregnant form rather than hide it. A diamond necklace rested against her collarbone, catching the light with every movement. Her hair was swept back in soft waves, her makeup polished but subtle, highlighting her eyes, the eyes of a woman who had endured fire and risen from the ashes. Reporters shouted her name, cameras flashing wildly. But Emma didn't shrink. She walked with her shoulders back, chin lifted, the strength of 1,000 whispered promises carrying her forward. And beside her, steady and undeniable, was Victor Harrington. His presence was like armor, commanding the attention of the crowd before they even realized who Emma was. When he offered her his arm, she accepted, not as a woman leaning on a savior, but as a partner walking into battle. Inside, the atmosphere shifted the moment she entered the ballroom. Conversations faltered. Eyes widened. The same people who had laughed weeks ago now stared in silence, stunned. Andrew Weston's glass froze halfway to his lips. Hila's painted smile wavered. Emma caught his gaze across the room, and for the first time she saw fear flicker in his eyes. The orchestra swelled, as if punctuating the moment. Emma and Victor descended the grand staircase together, every step deliberate, every movement radiating control. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't ashamed. She was claiming her place, not as Andrew's wife, not as his victim, but as Emma Weston reborn. When they reached the floor, the crowd parted instinctively. No one dared block their path. The whispers rose like a tide. She looks incredible. Is that Victor Harrington with her? What does this mean for Andrew? Emma didn't answer. She didn't need to. Victor guided her toward the stage, where Andrew had been preparing to give his keynote. The irony wasn't lost on her. Last time, he had used the microphone to humiliate her. Tonight, that microphone would be his undoing. Andrew forced a smile as they approached, but his knuckles whitened around his glass. "Emma," he said smoothly, though his voice carried a slight tremor. "What a surprise." Emma tilted her head, her voice calm, clear. "Surprise, Andrew, or disappointment?" The crowd gasped softly, the tension thick as smoke. Hila clung tighter to his arm, her eyes narrowing. "What are you even doing here? You don't belong." Emma's gaze cut to her, sharp as glass. "Funny, that's exactly what he once told me. Turns out he was wrong." The audience murmured, eyes darting between them. Andrew's smile faltered. He cleared his throat. "This is a private event. You weren't invited." Victor stepped forward, his presence radiating authority. "On the contrary, I invited her. And considering my company now funds half of this gala, I'd say she belongs here more than you do." The crowd erupted in whispers again. Andrew's face paled, his arrogance slipping. He turned back to Emma, desperate to regain control. "You think dressing up and parading in here makes you powerful? You're nothing without me. Nothing." Emma's voice didn't waver. "No, Andrew, I was nothing with you. Tonight, I'm everything you never believed I could be." The room fell silent, every word cutting through the air like thunder. Emma stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his. "You told me I'd beg to come back. You told me I couldn't survive without you. Look at me now. Do I look like someone begging?" The crowd collectively held its breath. Even Hila seemed to shrink back, her confidence cracking. Andrew's jaw tightened. "You think this charade will last? You're a scandal waiting to happen." Emma's lips curved into the faintest smile. "No, Andrew, the only scandal here is you." Victor placed a folder on the podium. Inside were documents, proof of Andrew's financial manipulations, evidence of his affair paid for with company funds, every ugly truth he had buried. The press had already been tipped off. The murmurs turned into gasps as the first few pages were lifted by curious hands. Andrew lunged forward, but Victor blocked him effortlessly. "You humiliated her in front of the city," Victor said coldly. "Tonight, she takes her dignity back." Emma turned to the crowd, her voice steady, strong. "I may have been broken, but I am not destroyed. I stand here not as a victim, but as a mother, as a woman who refused to stay silent. And I promise you, no one will ever use my name as a joke again." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling until the entire ballroom thundered with it. Emma stood tall, her hand resting proudly on her belly, her gaze never leaving Andrew's crumbling facade. The man who once believed she'd crawl back to him now stood exposed, cornered, powerless. And Emma Weston was only getting started. The ballroom roared with applause, but Emma barely heard it. For years she had imagined what it would feel like to finally have her voice back, to no longer tremble under Andrew's shadow. Now, standing in front of the very crowd that once laughed at her, she felt something she hadn't in so long. Freedom. Andrew's face was flushed crimson, sweat beading at his temple. He snatched the folder from the podium, desperate to hide its contents, but whispers already crackled through the room like wildfire. Phones flashed as guests snapped photos of the documents, messages already being sent to reporters. There would be no hiding now. "You'll regret this," Andrew hissed, his composure cracking. Emma looked at him with calm she hadn't known she was capable of. "No, Andrew, the only regret here is ever believing you could destroy me." Victor placed a steady hand on her shoulder. The weight of the crowd's approval rose like a tide, and for the first time, Emma wasn't drowning in it. She was carried by it. Andrew tried to speak again, but security had already stepped forward, summoned discreetly by Victor. They escorted him out as his protests echoed uselessly. Hila, realizing her golden ticket had just been revoked, slipped away in silence, her sequined gown dragging like a curtain on a failed performance. And just like that, the man who had mocked Emma, who had told her she would beg to return, was gone. The orchestra, unsure of what else to do, began to play again. The room shifted, the atmosphere transformed. People approached Emma, not with pity this time, but with respect. Some congratulated her courage, others offered partnerships, introductions, opportunities. But Emma didn't need their validation anymore. She had already found what mattered. Later that night, as the gala drew to a close, Emma stepped outside into the crisp air. The city lights stretched before her, endless, alive. She wrapped her arms around her belly and smiled softly. "We did it," she whispered. "We stood tall, and we're never going back." Victor joined her a moment later, his presence steady, grounding. "You were extraordinary tonight," he said. Emma turned to him, her eyes glistening. "I wasn't alone. You gave me the chance to rise again. I don't know how to thank you." Victor shook his head. "You don't owe me thanks. You owe yourself the truth that you were always strong enough. I only reminded you." Her heart swelled. For so long, she had measured her worth through Andrew's eyes. Now she realized her value had never been his to give or to take away. Weeks passed, and Andrew's empire collapsed in a storm of scandal. Headlines detailed his misuse of funds, his affair, his arrogance. Investors pulled out, the board removed him, and his name, once spoken with admiration, became a cautionary tale. Emma, meanwhile, was rising. With Victor's guidance, she launched a foundation dedicated to supporting single mothers abandoned by powerful men. The very people who once mocked her now praised her vision, her strength, her ability to turn pain into purpose. She became more than Andrew's ex-wife. She became Emma Weston, advocate, mother, leader. When her daughter was born on a bright spring morning, Emma held her tiny hand and whispered, "You'll never know the world he tried to keep us in. You'll know only love, dignity, and strength." Victor visited the hospital, holding the baby gently, his stern expression softening. "She's perfect," he said. Emma smiled through tears. "Her name is Grace, because that's what saved us." Life moved forward. Slowly, surely, Emma built a new world. Not the gilded cage Andrew once promised, but a life rooted in truth. Her foundation grew, her voice amplified, and everywhere she went, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of a woman who had survived fire and emerged forged in steel. And though Victor remained by her side, sometimes as an ally, sometimes as something more, Emma knew her strength didn't come from him or from any man. It came from within. 1 year later, she stood once again at the top of the grand staircase at the Waldorf Grand, but this time not as a guest. She was the keynote speaker. The chandeliers glistened, the cameras flashed, and the crowd fell silent as she spoke. "I once believed my worth depended on someone else's approval," she began, her voice strong. "I was wrong. Our worth is ours alone, and no matter how many times we are knocked down, we can rise again, higher, stronger, unstoppable. Tonight is not about me. It's about every woman who has ever been told she isn't enough. We are enough, and together, we are unstoppable." The applause shook the walls. Emma felt her daughter's tiny fingers curl around hers from the stroller beside her. She looked out over the sea of faces, no longer afraid. Her story was no longer one of humiliation. It was one of redemption. Andrew's voice would never echo in her ears again. The laughter that once haunted her was replaced by cheers. The woman who had been mocked, broken, and discarded was now a symbol of resilience. And as she left the stage, Victor's eyes met hers. There was no need for words. They both knew the truth. Emma Weston had won, and she would never, ever be silenced again. So my wonderful friends, the story has finally come to an end. And if you're still here with me right now, listening to every word, it means something has touched your heart in ways words alone can't explain. Emma's journey wasn't just about heartbreak or revenge. It was about rediscovering her strength when the world tried to convince her she had none. It was about turning pain into power and humiliation into healing. The Stoics used to say, "The obstacle is the way." What once seemed like the end for Emma became the very path that led her to rise higher than she ever imagined. And isn't that life itself? We all carry scars, but those scars can become the proof of our resilience. So maybe tonight, take Emma's story as a reminder. You are not defined by who left you, but by how you choose to rise. If this touched you, my friends, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe so we can keep walking these journeys together. Because like Emma, none of us are truly alone.